Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
Hi there. This is Dan and Jennifer Digman. Welcome to the 31st episode of A Couple Takes on MS.
And hi, this is me, Jennifer Digman. Dan already introduced me, but I thought it was worth saying my name. And again, who are you, mister?
I'm Dan Digman. So
yeah, we've introduced ourselves, and in case you forgot or you're new to the program, A Couple Takes on MS deals with multiple sclerosis. Both Dan and I have been living with MS for over 15 years.
Okay, I was going to say you're over 20. I'm 18.
Yeah, so we feel pretty experienced to talk about MS, and we're a married couple, and we have two different cases or types of MS if you want to get really specific. I'm living with secondary progressive MS.
And I've got the relapsing remitting kind, and so I think it's just what we're taking issues with multiple sclerosis and approaching it from obviously two different perspectives, but also then as the roles of caregivers. And I think something that we're talking about today that it's kind of a sensitive.
It's a heavy topic.
It's a very heavy topic. It's about sadness and depression. And sadness and depression when you're living with multiple sclerosis. And I think it's a question of what's the difference.
And I think this is applicable to any person, whether you're living with MS or not. I mean, just ask yourself, are you sad or are you depressed? Maybe you're super happy and this doesn't really relate to you, and that's great, but I don't want to say that I'm a sad or depressed person right now. But recently, actually it was about a month ago today, that a dear, dear friend of mine, her husband informed us that they were bringing hospice in to take care of her. And I have to just tell a brief story. I graduated from college over 20 years ago, and this dear friend of mine was a sorority sister. And you can think what
sorority?
Oh, that was Delta Phi Epsilon. And Patty, that was my friend's name, and I were proud members of D Phi E. And from the beginning, we were fast friends. And it was kind of coincidental that I was born on November 6th. And Patty was born on November 6th. Thus, she was my Scorpio girl. And unfortunately, Patty was living with, she died. I guess that's really sad. I've not said this out loud before. She had breast cancer, and she was far too young, and it took her incredibly too soon. She's left behind an amazingly beautiful family. And so about a month ago, Dan and I were coming home from Washington, D.C., when I did get the text that they were putting Patty into hospice, and the end of her life was drawing near. So for the last month, my sorority sisters, and I have been dealing with grief. And I asked Dan the question, am I sad or am I depressed? And I think that that's a very applicable topic to any person, but especially a person living with multiple sclerosis.
And it's really interesting just how, when you're first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, all of a sudden you find so many people that are living with multiple sclerosis. And once you started asking the question about, are you depressed or are you sad, the number of articles, the number of things in the media that we're seeing, and there actually was an article is on the Active Beat website, and and this was posted on March 19th, depression versus sadness, 12 ways to tell the difference. And I think it's very interesting with us with multiple sclerosis in terms of saying, are we depressed or are we sad? And you have like definitions straight from the National MS Society.
And it's just the National MS Society says that depression is a term commonly applied to a wide variety of emotional states, ranging from feeling down for a few hours on a given day to severe clinical depression that may last for several months. And I've read through this Active Beat article that Dan mentioned about the 12 ways to tell the difference between depression and sadness. And I feel that I'm both sad and depressed. And, dealing with my friend's death and the grief of that is really bringing this up. But then Dan asked the question, when I was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, was I depressed?
And I think that was the question too, because in relating to this, it's just a question, were you sad, were you depressed? And I know that when I was first diagnosed, my doctor and my neurologist immediately ordered me to go and see a counselor / psychologist to talk to. And I think that was a very, very strong move on their account to just keep an eye on things from the outset. So I guess the question is then, Jennifer, when you first were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis as a 23-year-old woman who had just graduated from college, did this formal diagnosis with a chronic progressive disease of the central nervous system for which there is no cure, were you sad? ? And were you depressed? ?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, Dan. I don't think that I was just sad or I was depressed, but I was lost. Diagnosis day, and I'm sure people listening to this radio program, if you're living with multiple sclerosis and you think back to the time you were diagnosed, yes, I was lost, I was sad, I was depressed. I went through a laundry list of emotions. And now, 20 years later, living with the disease, I'm both sad and I'm depressed depending on the day. And it's not, I don't want to give you this impression that I'm walking around with a big gray cloud over my head or something. I have a great life and I'm very happy. But it is something that you deal with. I remember when I was first diagnosed being lost and having so many questions. And that's why I reached out to the National MS Society to get answers to those questions. So I think being lost is the first way I could describe that. How about yourself, Dan? What about you when you were diagnosed?
Well, I think initial diagnosis was I was sad. I bawled my head off. I think that was just what you deal with when there's this reality that this isn't something that's going to go away, that this is something you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life. That is, unless, of course, they find a cure for this disease. Was I ever depressed? I don't think so. I think, obviously, going to a counselor, but that was just more to monitor, and I stopped doing that after about 3 sessions because I'm like, this really is doing nothing for me. I think he was enjoying it more than I was.
And how would you define depression versus sadness? If you didn't think you were depressed, were you at least sad when you were diagnosed?
Oh, I was.
Like
how
you
about
said,
this?
you cried your eyes out, so you were sad. But was it short-lived? Were you just sad in the initial first days? Or?
I think, just to use a word, it's not obviously it's different than depression and sadness, but you used loss. I think I was devastated. Where it's just it's there, but I wasn't. I was sad. I don't think I was depressed. I think one of the things in the article from the Active Beat on the website that I really, and obviously we're not psychologists, psychiatrists, anything like that. We're just two people who are living with multiple sclerosis. So we're not doctors. But the thing that I really took from it, from this article that really stood out with me, is how he defined the difference. Is that you think of a runner, and he said that the sadness is like the sprinters, and you're going to be sad, but a sprinter is there, you run, it's quick, and it's over and done with quickly, whereas depression is more like the marathon.
Well, and what's interesting is I think it makes sense if you're using that analogy marathon. It's kind of like multiple sclerosis. Like for those of us living with the disease or the family or caregivers of those, we're in this for the long haul. So it does feel very much like I'm a marathoner living with multiple sclerosis, which doesn't mean that depression should go hand in hand. But those periods of sadness, or even if you are living with depression, that's not surprising because you are in this disease forever, living with a chronic illness. But I think it's important for me is, with Patty, for example, with her death, I'm sad. I'm lost like I was when I was diagnosed with MS. But it doesn't mean I can't have good times. I know since Patty's passed away, Dan and I have done a lot of things in this past month where I have laughed and I don't feel guilty. I know that Patty's up in heaven looking down and smiling, and I know that good times will continue. And maybe that's a difference where it's not depression, but it's just sadness, and that I can go on. Would you say that's...
And I think that, and that's where, our experiences where it's like, I'm not depressed in terms of emotional feeling, but I think that's where things get a little more challenging with multiple sclerosis in terms of, sometimes the depression or the sadness is like an initial feeling, but I think depression, as I'm reading everything, there's something chemically that's different, and I think it's just like looking at things. There was an episode in the podcast Real Talk MS about an app to help people with depression, but according to this, with John Strum as the host, but it was that depression affects about 50% of the people who are living with multiple sclerosis, and I think it's just that chemical imbalance, because sometimes we could not be, maybe the diagnosis didn't make us sad, but it's like we could be depressed just because of something that is going on internally, chemically. I mean, and I think when they talk about and as I'm reading these articles, and of course I'm freaking out, because when it talks about like sleeplessness, or how you wake up and you don't sleep, and that's an issue I have. And we've talked about this.
Right, yes, that's true.
That I don't, I can drink coffee till, 2, 3, 5 in the afternoon and not have any trouble falling asleep. But then after about a couple hours, I can't stay asleep. And I've tried not drinking coffee so late in the day, but I still just wake up and I'm not depressed. I don't feel sad, but it's just something that's in me that I'm just like, and I'm not saying it's depression, but I think it's definitely something that I need to keep monitoring and looking
certainly,
into.
because you can look on, on the internet, or you can talk with someone. I'm looking at an article from WebMD that talked about symptoms of depression, and it's things like trouble concentrating, or crying, or a hard time making decisions. And again, it says trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, aches and pains that you can't explain, things like headache or low sex drive. Well, those are just symptoms for a whole lot of problems. So you can't say, oh, I have a headache, I must be depressed. You really have to dive a little deeper and really have an honest assessment of yourself. But these are some of the symptoms. And when you said, you were having trouble sleeping, Well, Dan, you do have a tendency to drink coffee maybe a little late in the day.
True.
And when you stop doing that, you sleep a little more soundly. Or when you are stressed out, maybe that disrupts your sleep. So I'm not saying like just everybody go see a therapist or see a doctor, but don't take, and I don't want to belittle the reality of depression or sadness, don't take those lightly. You know, if you think that your problem is a little more severe, or if you can't, you know, like in the instance where I said with Patty's death, I have had happiness in this past month where I'm not constantly feeling like I'm under a cloud. If you're not feeling that way, if you do feel like you're really sad a majority of the time, reach out, look for some help. You know, just go to the National Multiple Sclerosis Society website, for example. Type in the word depression and you can find some different things to help you and to get some help to deal with that. Because depression is a really big topic and it is a really important thing, and there is a lot of treatment options, much like multiple sclerosis now with 13 or 14 different drugs that can treat MS. Maybe not cure it, obviously, but it like lessen the severity and the frequency of the disease. With depression, there are things that can help you manage that.
And I think that's just something that really has to be taken care of, and not just thinking it would fade away, because depression is real. I mean, as far as being sadness, you say that, you know, after everything with Patty, there has been moments of happiness. It's like, what makes you happy? What makes you laugh?
I think, well, certainly you do. I mean, you make me happy. Memories of Patty. She was a great dancer, and we had some good times that probably are not radio friendly to talk about. You know, she was my sorority sister in college, but memories of that or memories of other friends. Even just in the most simple terms, if I see a funny TV show or I talk with my mom or dad and I have a great funny conversation, that can lighten the mood and give me some reason to smile. And I think that's important. I mean, you just have to, it's like another part of your health that you have to take care of. And I've been reading things, and I don't have anything right in front of me, but in the past I had read the importance of diet and exercise with helping you deal with sadness and or depression, and just that's really important. And you know, you've often said, Dan, when you eat better and you exercise, you feel better.
True.
And I think that feeling better, not that you're sad or depressed, but just you have a different level of clarity in your mind.
It does. I think that when I used to run, the running, I would come home from work and I'd be crabby from work and angry and frustrated, and I would just go run. And after I ran, all of a sudden I wasn't mad anymore about work. Or during that, 40-minute run, it's like I saw the light, and things weren't as bad as they once seemed.
And I think that's interesting because, as I've talked about before, I no longer walk, and I'm using a wheelchair. And that right there, that humongous change in the course of my life with the disease, that can cause sadness and that can cause depression.
Okay, so let me ask this then. When you're talking about, okay, you no longer walk and you use a wheelchair, so we say when you're first diagnosed, were you depressed? When you first used the wheelchair, were you depressed, or was that something where I think I remember you saying that you never thought that this would be your everyday life?
I did not. You're correct. I think, wow.
I listen.
You do, thank you, and I love that about you. I think when I first started using a wheelchair, excuse me, it was a need based thing, and I could do things more quickly, and I wouldn't miss out on things if I used a chair because it was difficult to walk with a walker, and I was slow. And perhaps even now, 15 years later that I've been using a wheelchair, I regret giving up my slow walking in favor of using a wheelchair to more efficiently do things. But in the beginning, I really thought that it was functional and it would make things better for me. So I wasn't sad using the chair. And maybe, like I said, 20 years or 15 years later, I'm like, boy, I should have maybe thought about that, but it just became part of my life. But when you become using a chair more often and become more reliant on it, I think that I know I was sad. Because there are a number of things, let's be honest, that aren't handicap accessible, or there are things that you can't do that you're limited because you don't have the mobility, but that's something that you and I have dealt with and we've overcome and we've managed, and we have found that great things can still happen if you don't walk. So
Well, I think a lot of things with multiple sclerosis, at least in my experiences, it's never been something where boom, my hands are numb, boom, I can't do this, boom, it happens. Things just kind of ease their way into my life. Whereas it's like you with the walking in the wheelchair, it was like you'd use it occasionally and then a little more, a little more. It's just like that my hands, I used to not be able to feel my fingertips, and now it's like my whole hand is numb, but it's not like I woke up one day and everything was boom, numb.
I think the word that I use is insidious. Nice. Because I often feel like it just slowly creeps its way into your life. And you can deal with the little changes, maybe that makes it a little more if there's any ounce or any shred of truth to this, maybe it makes it a little easier to deal with because the changes aren't so abrupt and drastic. It just slowly creeps in like fog in a Scooby-Doo mystery. It's just that fog, Raggy, where it's just like slowly, like I'm not walking as fast or my balance isn't as good, and so maybe that makes it a little easier to deal with. But there is sadness and depression that, I remember when I was diagnosed in the beginning, I was sad, and I would say I was depressed because for a while MS was all I could think about. That was such a drastic change. But, 20 years later, I look at all the things I've managed to do and great moments I've had, and I think that wouldn't be possible if I wasn't dealing with the disease.
Right.
I mean, I know that sounds kind of silly, but
no, it makes perfect sense. And I think that one of the big things that totally helps, and obviously, again, this is not medical thing. This is just my experiences and everything.
Yeah.
I think it's even more easy to have because it's almost like the chicken or the egg. Am I sad or am I depressed? Or am I depressed because I'm sad, or am I sad because I'm depressed?
Right.
And I think that the one thing too is don't close yourself off from the rest of the world. I think because then you're limiting yourself to just your own thoughts, your own visions, your own thoughts, your own dreams, your own fears.
That's an excellent point.
But that's what we've said repeatedly. Is like MS can be such an isolating disease, and I think that isolation can lead to the sadness, which then could lead to the depression or whatever order.
Where you feel completely alone, and if you don't reach out to other people, and I think that's why you and I, as you said, we drill that into listeners' heads, is to reach out into the community and don't feel, if you can, because you shouldn't feel. It's not that you shouldn't feel, but you are not alone. Because the MS community is full of really supportive people.
And you don't need to get out of obviously, you want to get out of your house, but with the computer, with everything online, the number of friends we've made just through the internet, through the connections are there. And I think that when all is said and done, as we're talking about the difference between sadness versus depression, and especially in living with multiple sclerosis, take care of it and don't let it fester, because these things can be real and it could just.
And it's true, and I didn't mention this, and I know it's just that multiple sclerosis physically changes your body, but it also changes some chemistry in your brain. So some of that depression could be from the demyelinating nature of the disease. I think that's worth mentioning, or it could be because of the medicine that you're taking. There are a lot of reasons for depression or for sadness, and that's why, as Dan was saying, reach out there and find help and don't go it alone.
And I think that's one thing. And as we're sitting here talking, I was thinking too, in terms of like differences between something you said, got me thinking, like, is the difference between depression and sadness would be like the difference between, are you hungry or are you starving? I mean, it's just like the hungry being sadness, starving the depression. Or is that just an analogy that doesn't work? You see what I'm saying? Because it's
I
like,
see what you're saying, and I think it would be worth investigating and looking a little more into it.
because it's like there's difference. I mean, a lot of times when we're sad, we say, "Oh, I'm depressed." Well, sometimes you're hungry, and you say, "Oh, I'm starving." But it's like, are you really starving?
And they're varying degrees, and I think that's important. But either way, I think it's most important to reach out. Don't go it alone. Look for resources on the internet or over the phone. Your neurologist, your primary care doctor. Get the help if you need it. And thanks for listening to me talk and Dan talk today.
Well, thanks for tuning in, and let us know. I mean, what's your experiences with depression and sadness? Reach out to us on our website at danandjenniferdigman.com or on Twitter at danandjendig. Make that happen. But again, just with sadness and depression, just reach out, make connections, talk to doctors, get the help you need when you need it. So again, this was Dan and Jennifer Digman on a couple takes on MS for the 31st episode. Thank you to the MS&Me Radio Network for having us. Thanks to the Blue Giraffe Kid for composing the theme music. Till next time, this is Dan Digman
And Jennifer Digman.